Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you're joining us from today, or maybe even tomorrow. Now, this is District 71 calling, and welcome to another fun, informative, and engaging webinar/podcast in the D71, that's District 71, Brand Builders Series, Toastmasters Unplugged. Hi, everyone. My name's Nigel Smith, past president of Birmingham Bullring Speakers here in Area 39, Division E, District 71, UK and Ireland. Now, I've been a Toastmaster for a little over 6 years. I'm delighted to be involved in this webinar podcast series with the wonderful Olga Byrne. And I want to welcome you all this evening because we have a very special version of Toastmasters Unplugged entitled Stand and Deliver. We're going to get to the core of confident and composed communication. And it really is my pleasure to be chatting with our very special guest tonight, who has simply been there, seen it, done it, and even got the t-shirt. And when it comes to amplifying Toastmaster skills above and beyond club level into the real world, our guest speaker really embellishes this totally. Now, our guest tonight is a professional speaker, communications trainer, and presentation coach. She's even a TED talker, a delivery keynoter rather, an esteemed distinguished Toastmaster at DTM. Now, she's enjoyed a career in broadcast sales, national training, and even live television, with the purpose of evaluating client conversation, enhancing communications, and more importantly, making messages memorable. Oh, and she's also co-founded a successful advertising agency in Richmond, Virginia. That's VA, by the way. Even today, you can still find her doing what she does best as a live television host on the RVA Small Business Network channel. And there's more, of course, there would be. Oh, yes, our speaker is also the co-author of Gusty Tales Off the Rails, Living Life Out Loud. It's the love of the power of the story that has elevated her to 2018 world semi-finalist in the international speech competition. I see a future goal here, no doubt. There's also something here to be said about the past president of the NSA. NSA, National Space Administration? No, none of that. It's a National Speakers Association in Virginia. What would Toastmasters say about that? Perhaps we're going to find out. Now, also in her busy role as a certified trainer, our speaker tonight has worked with audiences from Maine to Minnesota and to Miami and every state in between. And tonight, we're pleased to go live with her across multiple virtual platforms across the globe. Now, when our speaker is not running her business, she's running physically and avidly, running around after 5 grandchildren and herself running on copious amounts of iced tea, caffeine-induced, I guess. So please do help me in welcoming to our virtual stage, all the way from Richmond, Virginia, Joan Bowling, DTM. Hi, Joan. How you doing?
Oh, Nigel, how are you? So good to see you.
You too. It has been a while, and I remember fondly when we did the Speaker to Trainer series. It must be 2-3 years ago now, and all those wonderful times we had together learning and growing and really just stepping outside of our comfort zone. So it's really amazing to see you back. And I also never forget the time that you came to the PMI UK Changemakers launch event and set our club off to what has been now our 3rd year. We got President's Distinguished for the first 2, so you set us off in the right way. But that's enough about all of that. How about you? How have you been today?
I have been so very good. You know, in the States, we're coming up on Thanksgiving holiday, where we're thankful for everything that we have in our lives. And that also involves cooking. So something that I didn't put in that way too long little introduction right there is I'm such a cheesecake fan or fanatic. I've been making them for decades. So later on tonight or this afternoon here in the States, I'll be making a pumpkin praline cheesecake and an apple cinnamon cheesecake. I wish I could share, but I'll tell you how they turned out.
Excellent. Well, maybe when we invite you back next time around, you can tell us all about it. We've got a little bit of an insight there, Joan, to the real Joan there.
You got to mix it up a little bit, right? Yep.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by just getting a bit of a sense of who Joan is, you know, where you grew up, what you did, how you moved into what you're doing right now, and yeah, just a little bit of background, really.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question. I think if you everybody goes backwards a little bit in their lives, they can see what engaged them, what interests them, what connected with them, even when they were a small child in elementary school. And for me, there were so many experiences that spoke to what I'm doing right now. For example, maybe some of you, because they're international, were acquainted with the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. The beautiful Judith Jameson was lead dancer. She is 5'10", which is quite tall for a woman dancer, but oh my gosh, her movement with the music and in dance and connection with the audience is something that I will always remember. We were also fortunate that every month we would go see the Pittsburgh Symphony. And again, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which if you're looking at an East Coast map is right in the middle of the East Coast. And so that all those instruments, all those voices could come together and deliver that score was something so touching for me. Now, my high school, we move into the high school years, was about 10 minutes away from Carnegie Mellon University. Carnegie Mellon University, among other things, was known for its drama department. So we were fortunate enough to have some of those drama teachers come and direct our plays. And I remember even above the plays, Nigel, just the exercises that the directors would do to get us audience engagement were fantastic. And then lastly, maybe some of your audiences might be acquainted with Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a television show out of the public broadcast system in Pittsburgh. And Fred Rogers was an author. He was a children's educator. He was a musician. And he was on air as well. And what I learned about him in educating children is that he was a fantastic listener. He had so much patience. And when you were in front of him, you were the only person in the room. And so based on my experience in working with him, and I worked with him on some of his live shows in Pittsburgh, the dance, the drama, the music, it just opened me up for the power of engagement. So that led to other opportunities as well in college and certainly in the professional arena. But I think if our audience can just get a glimpse as far as what interested them, I'm sure they can see the evolution of who they are today.
Oh, great call out, Joan. So if there are any folks listening on the live platforms we've got, please do enter comments. We'll bring them up on the screen and we get Joan to comment on there. Just want to pick up on maybe one thing that you mentioned there, Joan, all about engagement. And what do you think is the secret sauce with engagement? How, almost like the Goldilocks piece about not too much, not too little, but just the right amount to keep people interested and motivated and engaged. How do you sort of work on that?
Well, they say that speaking, on a platform is about a conversation, a two-way conversation with your audience, but you're the conversation leader. So engagement then is about being aware of the who, what, when, where, why, the basic questions of who your audience is all about. And when you create a talk, when you create a speech or a presentation, a lot of times the immediate go-to is, okay, what do I want to say? All right, let's see. However, the first question is, who is going to be in front of me? And that then becomes the foundation for the engagement. And the engagement then, the variables will change based on that subject matter. I remember, Nigel, I was at a banking conference because I was working with a banking association. And I specifically, when I'm an attendee in any speaker's event, I like to sit in the very back because I want to be able to take it all in, but also be aware of, do they project? Can I see? What is the audience response? Well, this banking conference was about finance. Okay, go figure. And there was one speaker, he was an economist, and he had his doctorate, and he was very well schooled. And the first thing he did was throw up a spreadsheet. Well, nothing is more of a killjoy throwing up a spreadsheet with all these tiny grids and all these numbers. And I thought, oh, this is going to be the longest 45 minutes of my entire life. But wait, he knew his audience. And so he threw up the spreadsheet and he said, well, I'm going to condense it for you. This is all about, and he threw out a concept and he said, I'm going to illustrate it for you right now. And he asked the audience, he said, how many of you eat fast food? So McDonald's or Wendy's, whatever your favorite fast food is. Well, like 80% of the audience put their hands up. He said, okay, who's going to help me out with okay, you too, with the favorite fast food? Immediate engagement. So he took the items that they offered out, a Coke, a burger, French fries. He quantified that as well, put that in his spreadsheet and illustrated the point. Oh my gosh, it was magic. People were talking, people were laughing. I still remember that talk 10 years later. He was just, I will say, a magician, but more than anything, he knew who was going to be in his audience and how to capture attention. So he took a story, pivoted to the point, his illustration, and then made that application. I thought it was such a beautiful thing.
Just so many things I'm thinking about right now, but the first one that springs to mind here now, Joan, if you can give us a few tips on it as well. I think the story you've just described, it's all about being memorable. You remember it because of what it was and what it meant, and you can probably hear the words that he was speaking at the time. Are there any other tools or techniques that you've come across, witnessed, or even used yourself, where you can sort of embed, if you like, that sort of memory of the message? Because I know, and the art of storytelling is so popular, of course, but is there some secret sauce in there you could share with us?
So the memory of the message, I'm going to go back to the international competitions, and I've competed 4 times, and maybe this is a good time to segue into that. I'm a 7-year Toastmaster. And in 2017, I competed and I came in 2nd place in the district. And okay, so I went, next year I'm going for it, 2018. And so I went for it, and that's when I earned the district and then the semifinal round. We'll park that for a minute. Then sure. In our district, because of international events, pandemic, we sort of took an aside, and there were 2 years of non-competition. Then I jumped in again, and I took 3rd in our area contest. And I remember being so disappointed, Nigel. Now, I won my club contest because, don't tell anybody, nobody else competed.
I've been there.
So I was like, okay, Joan.
Yeah, you still got to be within time, though, Joan, haven't you? Still got to be within time.
Right. But here's the thought behind that. And then I competed one more time this year and took 3rd in my district. It doesn't need to be complicated. When you think of your audience, a lot of us go to a story. Well, okay, I've had a really great life. I've been very fortunate. And again, in this season of thankfulness in the United States for Thanksgiving, I have a great family, great friends, great job. The list goes on and on. I'm so very thankful. Well, that talk would be what, 10 seconds, 15 seconds? So it's not resonating with the audience. What is something that really would resonate with the audience that is heartfelt from me? And whenever it's been heartfelt from me and genuine and authentic, I can get behind it, and it usually connects with my audience. And, it takes you being a little bit vulnerable. It takes you pulling back the curtain, taking off the veil. And that's exactly what I did in 2018. It was a story about a mother's love and support in a daughter that didn't make a really smart choice and impacted her life in a big way. Well, how many people in our audience are parents? I would venture to say, right, Nigel, so many. And there's some things, some decisions we all wish we could change, some more dramatic than others. I had so many people after each talk that came up to me to share their story and their conversation that it was quite the gift back to me. So I think as far as other tips, don't go for the sensational, go for something that you really learned, that you can share, that's very heartfelt, and that will generate with your audience. Now, it takes you sitting down and being thoughtful about it. I keep a story file, and when something hits me or resonates with me, then I will put that in a story file, a sentence just long enough to remember what that was all about. And if it's appropriate, then I will use that in a training or a talk. And that I find is a really good tool for me. And I think it would be a really good tool for others as well, because Nigel, life is fast, right? And so you're on to the next thing. It's the win philosophy. What's important now? And so to be able to carry that log with you and say, oh yeah, that would work. Oh, that was fun. Really is a really good tool, I think, that most of us can utilize.
Oh, that's fantastic. In fact, I can remember I've got a book on my bookshelf. I think it's in the house right now, but the title of the book is called Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins. And it's an actual book title. Yeah.
I have that right beside me.
Oh, really? Okay. Do you know what? I haven't read it. I love the title. I think it's great. But
isn't that fantastic, by Annette Simmons? And she has two other books that are out as well on storytelling. And certainly, you know, that's a way to learn, is to know from others what they think works, what resonates as well. And oh my gosh, I have so many books. I mean, it's a fantastic way to get better at what you do. I agree. It's so funny that we have the same one. Yes.
Well, I've got a fantastic call to action now, which is to go away and read it after tonight's podcast episode. So thank you for that. The one thing I did want to just touch on from what you just mentioned there, Joan, about being authentic and genuine and heartfelt and all the rest of it. Vulnerability is an interesting one, isn't it? Because you can become more relatable, far more relatable by being vulnerable. But I noticed in the way you were talking, if you add credibility in before you become vulnerable, it becomes much more relatable and much more believable, as opposed to being vulnerable from the start without any sort of, if you like, credibility beyond that. I don't know if that's something that you recognize or see, but I think there's a right way around of getting these so that the whole thing gets into line, so that when you get to the vulnerable piece, you've got, you know, people on that journey because they're already listening and invested in what you're saying.
Yes, you know, and that speaks to, I was a coach for TEDx, which are speeches anywhere from 3 minutes to 21 minutes here in the Richmond area. And oh my gosh, how much fun was that to hear their stories and for them to share their idea whose time has come. Basically, that's the TEDx mantra, ideas whose time has come. And you know, it's really more about a conversation with the audience. And I remember one speaker in particular that I coached. She was assigned, you get assigned by a committee, a short, a timetable. So hers was, I think, 7 minutes, very, very short. Okay, almost like the international competition. And she is a diabetic in her 50s. And she was diagnosed when she was 5, very, very little. And got to the point every now and then of being angry about it. Why should I have to go through this? Why? And so I'm pushing back, which meant, unfortunately, she would make some bad food choices and, you know, be back on that insulin dependent. Well, what she decided to do, since she's an artist, is take those things that provide her with good health, the vials and the tubes and the needles, everything else. And she created some art avatars. And so her talk was embracing the challenge, embracing the maintenance, I won't say cure, but that helped her live. She elevated it instead of fighting it. And so you brought up the point of being credible. She's very credible in that she has this condition, this chronic condition. So how does she learn to educate, embrace, and elevate? What better thing to do than to wrap it around her talent, which is art? It is just a fantastic talk. And I was so proud of her for being vulnerable and sharing it. And the committee then elected for her to present that on the big stage.
Oh, wow. And I guess it was very cathartic for her as well, wasn't it, to actually accept that and to share it? and get the feedback and stuff like that. Excellent. I just wanted to rewind just a little bit,
Sure.
Joan. Go back to your contest experience. So when I first came into Toastmasters, I was always very wary of contests because it's like, oh, I'm measuring myself against other people here, you know. And then I realised that actually the only person I'm in competition with is myself.
Right.
So after your I know you've only been a Toastmaster 7 years, as you mentioned, but you've done some stellar things in terms of your progression. What would you say are some of the key learnings you've got just through that particular process?
Well, as far as learning, so when you first start off, I think Maya Angelou has a quote, the poet laureate in the United States, and she's since passed. She was a Duke University professor. She said, when you know how to do better, you do better. And so I was all energy in 2017 competing and second place. And I remember telling our district director, I didn't win. I really liked my talk. Okay, there's that. But I had a lot to learn. And so one of the beautiful things about competing is there are so many different ways to learn. You learn from other speakers, what they do, what they don't do, what you like. Now, again, I'm back to the authentic. We always want it to be you, but you can add tools to your toolkit as well. So you can learn from podcasts. You can learn from books. We talked about that. And some of the books that I absolutely love are Fierce Conversations. I love that book about how to manage conversations. We talked about Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins. Steal the Show by, Michael Port is a great one as well. So you can learn through reading. You can learn through watching other speakers. You can learn from, I'm going to take a side here. You can learn from watching politicians, politics aside. How do they present? What do you like? Vocal variety. Are they engaging? Are they detracting? Those kinds of things. You, Nigel, I learned from you when I first met you at One Country, One World. You have this beautiful, authentic way and creative way of engaging the audience. And I think what that did was unite and energize many of our meetings. So for that, I was like, wow, he's pretty cool. So I think if you can be aware of takeaways from everyone, that's great. Now, the other side of the story is practice, practice, practice. So you can do a table topics, right? But a 5 to 7 minute speech, I think, takes construction. And when you get to the international level, everybody's a good speaker.
Yes.
It's about the writing. And I think you need to be aware of how you present, how you write, what the flow of your story is. I, being in the broadcast industry for quite some time, I'm pretty good at writing 30-second copy. Well, that does not make a 5 to 7 minute talk.
Right.
So how do I shift that? So what I did was I relied on several Toastmasters to listen to different things for me. How's my flow? My vocabulary, how's that? Do you get what's going on with the 3 things that are key in any international talk? Does it resonate here? Is it important enough that you get it here, the meaning? Does it resonate with the heart? That's got to be a key component for your audience. And then I don't care how serious the topic is, you got to have some humor. It's like a roller coaster. Do you do roller coasters, Nigel?
I used to when my body could take it, but I've just come back from California a few weeks ago. But all the big ones at Universal, I just gave them a miss because, I just get rattled around too much these days.
Okay. Well, roller coasters, I think everybody's experienced at least one. And so you know that it's not just straight up the hill and straight down, most of them, and you're done. It's the element of surprise with we're climbing, we're leveling off, we're going down, now we're back up. So even with the most serious topic, you have to provide relief. Yeah. You can't go to a comedy show and laugh for a solid hour. Your stomach would hurt. You'd have to take a breather. The same thing with something that's so very sad Our emotions cannot handle that. And so that's why stories are so key, because the stories activate something called mirror neurons in our brain, and the ability to connect through physical sensations and emotions and memories. And so it's the balance in the story. So I had Toastmasters listen for impact, listen for delivery, and listen for writing. And I have to tell you, this last go around, Nigel, I have one Toastmaster friend. This is the first time I worked with him. He's a funny guy. He's a good coach. And I did my talk and he went, no. I went, no, that's your evaluation. So it was a progression from club to area to division to district round. And I will tell you, my talk changed each time. It got better. Just as I love making my cheesecakes, I feel they get better each time, because the more I make them, the more I improve. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. We're going to go to a question from the audience in just a moment. But I'm just wondering here, Joan, do you ever go through this process? I know I do it sometimes, which is the speech you planned, the speech you gave, and then the speech you wish you'd have given. Does that ever go through your mind in all of these things for your contest preparation?
So I'm going to say it goes through my mind, but I take off the last piece. Every time you have a conversation, every time you give a talk, every time you give a speech, a training session, whatever, it's always different, because you're not robotic with what you do. Yeah. And I also want everyone to be aware of energy levels. When is your peak time? Is it in the evening, Nigel? Is it first thing in the morning? When is it?
For me, probably in the morning. Yeah.
Morning,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so in your time zone, I'd probably be right at it right now, fully energy laden, just been through a work day, so a little depleted.
So everyone has their peak times. And so the energy levels will be different. Sure. And what happens, like if you speak at a dinner talk, but you're a morning person, and vice versa. I remember I've had several talks that are 7 a.m. in the morning. I'm a morning person, maybe not that morning. And I'm also not a coffee drinker. So that takes a lot for me to get into the moment right there. But I don't bemoan the fact that I could have given a different or a better talk. I give it my best shot and I let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good, isn't it? Because we all like to review what we've done, and very often we're our own worst critic, aren't we?
I agree with you on that.
Much harder than anybody else would be on us. And of course, the value in Toastmasters is that the feedback you get, whether you choose to accept it or not, does come from a good, trusted place. But what I'd like to do at this point, Joan, is just bring up a question from Scott. I think it just relates to something that you mentioned maybe a few moments ago about, are there any recommended podcasts, Joan, that have actually helped you in your journey?
I appreciate the question, Scott, and I need to delve a little bit more into podcasts. I am such a Toastmasters fan that I prefer to go online or go to different meetings to get a different flavor of things. I like to tap into meetings from my international Toastmaster friends and hear different things. So I must say, even though I've been guests on podcasts, I don't have one that I have a loyalty to. If you have some that you recommend, boy, Scott, I would love to hear from you. And then maybe I will follow up with Nigel as well to do a little bit more research, because there are some, oh my gosh, fantastic people out there to learn from. And if you can just take away one thing and put it in your toolkit, then I think it's a big thing. So Scott, if you have any, I'd love to hear from you as well, or anybody that's on the call too.
Thanks for that, Joe. That's just brought another question into my mind. From the podcasts that you do listen to, Joan, I get the sense that it's all about conversation and the level of interest and engagement. But do you find the sort of one-to-one conversation, or the panel, or maybe a group of three, what tends to work best in terms of the setting and the number of people actually on the podcast?
So in a podcast, I like the live panel. And so I like to, on podcasts, I've listened to those that have various voices involved. So pros and cons. So from a panel discussion, hopefully if the panel's prepared and the podcast host has had a pre-conversation to say, okay, Nigel, your specialty is, Joan, your specialty is, Scott, your specialty is, then the guests, the panelists, can engage in callbacks with the other guests. I love that because then they're not running that vertical, but they're interacting with each other, which is the name of the game, I think, in any conversation. Now, as far as the negatives of that, when you have one guest, you dive deep. When you have a panel, you just get a little, sort of like appetizer, maybe from each one of them. But I think, and I've moderated panels, both online and also live. And I think prep is the name of the game, to be able to have a moment to think about what you want to share. When I coach people for on-air interviews, I say, okay, they're going to prepare questions, the host will. However, what is the takeaway that you want to leave them with? And so you want to honor the ask of the question. But then if you want to segue into something that you really feel is very important, do that. Again, honor the ask, but then you can redirect to something else. And I think that's very helpful in a panel discussion as well.
Oh, no, useful skill. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to change tack slightly, Joan, because we can't talk about all the wonderful stuff you've been doing if we don't talk about live television. And the thought of anything to do with television studios, cameras, other people, just frightens everything out of me, to be completely honest, Toastmaster or not. How do you prepare yourself for something like that, which is it's one take only and that's the only thing that you can do? Is there some mental process you go through, maybe some Amy Cuddy power poses, or what is it that gets you into that mental state to do that sort of thing?
So thank you for that. Let me go back to where it all started. And I was in broadcast sales, and it was the first job syndrome. I wanted to be on television. I thought it would be glitzy and glamorous and fun, but I have no experience. So you have to have experience to get hired, but I can't get hired to get the experience. One of my clients was Southern States. Southern States is a large farm and animal feed producer running up and down the East Coast of the United States. And they're now into lawn and garden as well. They were one of my largest clients. And they said, Joan, we're going to be on live television for an hour. We committed to a series of shows in about a week, and we don't have a host. We like you, and we think you do a good job. Would you be interested? And I said, yes, I would be. I'm your girl. And then I think I had 7 nights of not sleeping. I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And also, Glitz and Glamour, that first show, Nigel, was all about bugs in your yard. Bugs Excellent. In your yard. And so they brought a collection of live bugs. Well, I'm looking at my manicure going, am I touching these bugs? What am I doing? So that kicked me off, but oh my gosh, I was so nervous. But it goes back to knowing who your audience is. And in live television, it's twofold. It's the guests who are on the set with you, and then it's your audience, whether they're in the studio or by phone or however we're connecting with them for questions. I interviewed my guests ahead of time to get a feel for their personalities, what they wanted to share. And so I was able to formulate questions ahead of time. So being a live television host is like being a ship's captain. So your camera is your compass. And then you have the crew behind the camera, and then you have your guests who are really your mates on the ship. And sometimes you can get into rocky waters, but you still have to steer the ship. So what could happen? Well, sometimes your guests who are great in pre-interview show up and they're tired or they're nervous or fill in the blank. So my first obligation then is to befriend them, make them so very comfortable to be in conversation with me and forget about the 3 cameras and all the lights and the crew that are there. And I'm pleased to say that I'm usually very successful in doing that. The second part of consider your audience is is out in the studio in the calls. What do they want to hear? What do they want to know about? And, in steering the ship, things can happen. For example, you might have a subject matter that doesn't interest you as much, or is complicated or hard. And I remember doing an automotive show, and Nigel, the only thing I know how to do is put the key in the car. That's it. I don't want to know how to fix it, what your brakes look like, but yet we had to engage for an hour, and I needed to sound halfway intelligent about that. So that
I would have loved that.
Okay, we'll bring you in for that one then next time. But you have to, you have to be able to deal with that as well. Technical issues, as you know, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And Toastmasters has been instrumental in helping me pivot. And that was very helpful. And I know we talked about that before we went live. One of the shows I did was for a large pet store. They actually had 4 or 5 in the Richmond, Virginia area. And so with pets and children, very unpredictable audience. So on the set, we had 3 large tropical birds. And, those birds are so very colorful, and the vocabulary is large, and sometimes they're a little bit smarter than we are. So 3 tropical birds on the perch on the set. And then we had our guest, a woman veterinarian, who had rather a large head of hair, beautiful head of hair. So the director says, everybody ready? Set looks great. I'm going to give you a 10-second countdown, Joan. Here we go. At 7 seconds, the first bird flies off the set. At 4 seconds, the next bird on stage right flies onto the shoulder of one of our cameramen. At 1 second, the last bird in the center hops up into the veterinarian's hair. And then the director cues me and says, hey, you're live. And then he does this. And this means you need to extend the clock. So I'm thinking, for what, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? How long do I need to ad lib? And that's where Toastmasters really comes in handy. And also doing your research comes in handy. So I can carry on the dialogue, not with my guests on the set. We were busy rounding them up, but the guests who are out in the audience who were very eagerly looking forward to asking questions, and the phone lines were full. So that was, each experience is different. And that was a fun one in retrospect.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you what happens when you can't steer the ship, and I think that the lesson there is the pivot. And I'm glad to hear that Toastmasters has added some value, because I guess without that sort of in-depth training and application, you might have found, well, I certainly would have found myself a little lost in that particular situation.
Right.
But so thank you for sharing that, Joan. And as you were talking, and when you were talking about having your guests, I was sort of thinking that you just sort of get into sort of a flow zone where actually you ignore the cameras and everything else that's going on. It's almost like you are just having that, sort of one-to-one conversation with these guys, and you can sort of filter all that out and make it just sort of move quite smoothly and quite naturally. Or do you always know in the back of your mind, actually, you are in a studio and, so on and so forth? I'm just interested to see whether or not you can sort of, like these top athletes can sort of just get tunnel vision for that 100 meters. Is it something similar that happens in the live TV world at all?
I hope that it happens for my guests, that they can tune everything else out. With the cameras will either have both of us here, or they might just go to the guest, or they might just go to me. So I can see the monitor and see what the cameras are doing. I also have to watch a clock and know when we're taking a break and be aware of some other things that are going on. So for me, it's like running a meeting a little bit, and that can be a little disconcerting for the guest, because we instruct them just to look at me at all times, even though I may be looking away because of some other responsibilities. However, staying in the moment with the conversation, being excited, sharing stories. And I remember there was one gentleman, speaking of car repair, he was a mechanic and he owns his own shop. It's collision repair. So you can imagine cars are pretty banged up. He comes in, redoes the body, replaces parts, whatever. Okay, great. Well, he was nervous because he's used to being under the hood of a car in a very, very natural environment there. And so I wanted him to illustrate a story. And so this was so beautiful, Nigel. He has 4 daughters, and his oldest daughter at 16, with each daughter, he was going to give them a car, but not maybe how you got a car or I got a car. They weren't going to go shopping, at a nameplate store. He was going to take a wreck, and he and the daughter were going to rebuild it together. Well, for this particular car, she wanted whatever the nameplate was. I don't know if it was a Ford or a Chevy or whatever the car was. And they rebuilt it together over 9 months. And she graduated from high school. And he said he asked her, how was the experience in working with your dad on this car? She said, it was the best. And I'm so going to miss this special time with you. And on the set, Nigel, this big guy is tearing up.
I can imagine.
And it was a beautiful moment of just taking a peek into what resonated with him, and how he can leave a lasting impression on his daughter through the work that he does and their time together. I just love that story.
Go ahead. Go on, sorry. No, carry on.
I also want to say, stories resonate with us so much, but I also want everyone to be aware of the stories that you tell yourself.
Yes.
The stories that we tell ourselves become our reality. And we've got to be careful that we don't reinforce a wrong interpretation of what's happening in a situation, because that will become our reality. So as we're talking about international competition and sharing with Toastmasters and the fun of stories, we generate about 33,000 thoughts a day. Our brain is quite the powerful tool. So be aware of some of the messaging that is coming across in your storyline, and to see whether you need to shift it, take a pivot, or even a timeout. I just wanted to offer that.
No, thank you. I just wanted to rewind a little bit, because the one comment I did want to make was when you're telling that lovely story about the father and daughter, I was sort of thinking here that may have been the first and perhaps only time that you'd got that bit of feedback. And that's why it was, and I think you managed to extract that from the interview. And it means so much. And, one of the things I'm looking at the moment in my Toastmasters journey is trying to get those happy chemicals in our body, like the serotonin and the oxytocin and the dopamine and all these things. If you can elicit those sort of feelings, you get that bonding, that connection, that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling, don't you? And those are the sort of things I'm trying to work on to make things really exciting. But so naturally, so instantly, just through, just a few words you can visualize that and see it in your mind as well. So that's quite beautiful.
Isn't that fantastic? I mean, how special that he was able to share that. And I remember in my training, one of the trainings that I get asked to do a lot is dealing with difficult people. And I'm sure you don't have in your life, Nigel, but I have some.
I have a few.
So one training I did in Minnesota, a woman came up afterwards with tears in her eyes, and she said, "Can you please help me with a situation at work?" And I thought, wow, what an honor that just in this short training, and she'll never see me again, that she thought enough of what we were sharing today and comfortable enough to come up and ask for some additional information. That's when you just feel like this is all working. I hear you, I see you, and I'm honoring you. So,
And you also have to believe what people tell you as feedback as well. If you're genuinely good at something and get respected for it, then you've got some value to offer. But I am curious, Joan, not necessarily about what she asked you, but what did you tell her?
What did I tell her? I don't remember what I told her, Nigel. I know that it was in Minnesota, and I know we had some private time talking about it. It has to be very abbreviated. And, I hopefully gave her some options. you go back to evaluation contest, evaluation for speeches, whatever you do in life, it's subjective, isn't it?
Mhm.
You can watch the international competition at any level and say, "Oh, I would not have chosen them for first place or third place or anything."
That happened at the weekend. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So part of it is the subjectivity of it
Yes.
based on, the competition and the judges and what have you. And that's really okay, because then the goal is for you to get better, for you to be aware, and also for you to have fun. If it's not fun, then, why are you doing it? I think work should be fun, and it needs to have some great benefits for you on that.
Yeah, definitely that purpose and drive and something that's going to get you out of bed in the morning fundamentally.
Mhm.
Actually, we've got just take a bit of a break here. We've got another question here from Scott. It's Toastmasters related, which is absolutely fine. So thanks, Scott. Yeah, do you want to share with us what you felt was your biggest challenge for you when you first embarked on your Toastmasters journey all those years ago?
I'm thinking way back when, and the story that I told that earned me second place in the district in 2017 was hosting international students for high school. And we have 4 kids. They were all out of the house, and we had lots of spare bedrooms. And fortunately or unfortunately, we agreed to take on international students, which was the best, from China and Italy and Germany and Persia. It was the best. Nonetheless, let's see, the biggest challenge for you in the beginning of your Toastmasters journey was being aware, I think, of what I needed to do to make some shifts in my story. I'm going to back that up, Scott. I was so nervous. Okay, let's be real. I was so darn nervous. And I'm not sure how you respond when you're nervous. Some people get quiet. Some people get really chatty. I tend to disappear down the hallway. So knowing how I responded and managing those butterflies to fly in formation, physically, mentally, emotionally, was really the key for me to enjoying sharing the story. I will tell you this, with the Toastmaster competition, to be able to have others, not even in a professional sense or an agenda sense of evaluating me, but others that came up to me that said, "Hey, Joan, here's what I think you might want to consider or make a shift." I also had one gentleman that told me early on that I would not win. Now, I'm not sure that that was correctly the right way to approach that conversation, but being able to be open enough and confident enough to say, "Tell me more. What do you see? What do you hear?" was very helpful in either allaying my worries or making some shifts. And as I shared with you before, Nigel, and Scott now, the talk that I start with at the club level always makes some movements and some modifications to take me to that district level. And
Yeah.
I love that. You always want to get better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And very often you learn more from the things you're not doing
Yes.
particularly well, as opposed to all the plaudits for things that people recognise you for. But it is a difficult place to go, isn't it? But what I just want to draw back to is that fundamentally, I think, and I'm glad you said it, then you got all the butterflies and things. I love the way you talked about getting that formation. I got this sort of murmuration in my mind there in terms of how they're all in sort of symphony together. But generally speaking, if you've got a little bit of stress, it does give you that bit of energy to really enhance your performance. But it is a fine line, isn't it? So that you don't get too much, because it can sort of take you over the edge a little bit into some sort of panic zone. So can you just sort of share with us how you sort of manage to get yourself in that position of equilibrium without going too far the wrong way?
Mm-hmm. Everybody has their own personal formula for sure. And what I know is I need to hydrate well in advance, right? Because you might get cotton mouth, as we call it, or dry mouth there. I'm an extrovert. So if we're at a competition, I want to chat you up. I may tend to want to pull back, but I really want to chat you up like, oh, Nigel, hey, nice jacket. So good to see you again. Just get out of myself because again, I have my talk down. We're just going to sail when it's my time to do it. So let's enjoy the environment and the setting that I'm in right now. I also know in this district competition this year, we had 6 in the district, and I spoke at 5:30, and I arrived at 8 a.m. that morning. So
What you call preparation.
It was a bit of a long day. I'm not going to lie.
It's like the morning lark becoming the night owl, isn't it?
Right, exactly. There's that. You have to find your own personal formula, I feel, for what works for you. And how you find that out is by making the commitment to speak at your club level, even if it's not competition, just to speak, to volunteer for those roles and see what goes through your mind, how you respond. And again, the more you do it, the more you know, and the more you're able to manage those things. Bruce Springsteen, who's, Bruce Springsteen is just that great rocker. There you go. He always gets nervous before he goes on. And he said, why not? It's a natural reaction, a body's natural reaction to leaning into a challenge. So if there are no stakes on the line, if you don't really care, you're sort of chill. And I love that after all these decades that he spoke so freely about that. I feel the same way.
It sort of half reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. So I think it's like anonymous because I can't remember who did it, but it goes along the lines of everything you want in life stands the other side of fear. So you have to go through it to get to the other side.
Yes.
And it's almost... Sorry.
I love that so much. And that's why it's important to manage the stories that you tell yourself.
Of course. Just while we're talking here, Joan, I just want to bring up this comment from Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. It's more of a statement rather than a question itself, but she's joined us a little bit late on this, so hopefully you can catch the rest of it a little later on the recording. But it's just another vindication, really, about how great Toastmasters is in supporting people to build confidence. Because fundamentally, when people come to Toastmasters, it's all about overcoming fear, building confidence. But as we all know, and as we discussed here, it's so much more than that. It's about leadership. It's about active listening. It's about feedback. I think fundamentally, one of the great things for me as well, Joan, it's about community as well, like-minded people. All boats rise with the tide, don't they, in the harbour? So have you, through your affiliations and memberships with the various clubs, felt that community spirit as well?
Oh, I absolutely love Toastmasters so much. It's my tribe. And I love that, again, I can go worldwide. What do we have? 350,000 members, 142 different countries. I know you, I know Olga, I know so many other people across the world. And then when we can get together live and in person at an international convention, I can give you a hug. I just think that what Toastmasters teaches fosters that so that we can all enjoy each other. And back to the Toastmaster skills. And Sarah had that comment about coaching. There was a coaching client I had. She was in the hospitality business in Chicago, major city, about, central United States, Chicago, Illinois. And she had worked very hard in the hospitality industry. I think she had a master's degree, and she was events. She could manage the back of the house, the kitchen and the setup and the speakers, big into events. She worked for a very large company out of New York City, but they had locations all across the United States. And she finally got what she was after, which was a promotion. Yay. So now she was going to be, instead of in front of everybody, she was going to be on a Zoom call every week with 10 other male vice presidents. And she reached out to me. She said, I can't speak. I'm so intimidated. And they need to get to know me. I need to get to know them. What am I supposed to do? So we leaned into some of the things that Toastmasters teaches, which is take a role, be early to the meeting, Greet everybody, all of those 10 managers that come in. Start a conversation. Offer to be the timekeeper. Offer to check in with whoever's leading the meeting as far as managing some of the components of the meeting. So she was able to get her voice heard in a more comfortable way, and therefore get known by the new people, because, or she was the new person. And so make an ease into a new group. And again, since she couldn't do that live and in person, she could do it virtually. That's what her challenge was. And I'm so pleased to hear months later that it's working. She's more comfortable and she's been able to figure it out. So that's good.
Wow, that's fantastic. That real practical learning from something so basic within a Toastmasters meeting. I often say to members of the clubs that I'm in, do everything you need to do in Toastmasters, make all your mistakes, but to get the real value of what you're doing here, you've got to do it outside. You've got to do it in the real world. You've got to do it in your vocational, your voluntary world, and just bring it to life. And it's transformational when you start to do those things. So thank you so much for sharing that story. I was going to ask then, is there anything that comes close to what Toastmasters gives in any other aspect of your life at all?
Anything that comes close as far as an organization, or
the feeling, or that sort of affinity of being part of something really great, I think it's just about the feeling that it gives you.
I'm going to say no, because I love Toastmasters. I wish that I had discovered it decades ahead, but I'm a big believer in, the timing is right for you for whatever you're doing right now. And so this community is so supportive. I have friends. I have people that I can help when they need help. In turn, I have people who can help me when I need help. I can try new projects. Before we went live, Nigel, I met you through Toastmasters, and we did a project together, a training project together with someone else from Ireland and someone else from Canada. How cool to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
And then Toastmasters has helped me with an agenda and with managing events. When I was president of the National Speakers Association for the Commonwealth of Virginia, I had never run a board before. And I was like, but then I lean on the Toastmaster things that I do every week in the meeting, and I know what my timing is. I know who's filling those roles. And then I, outside of the meeting, can evaluate what has happened and see where we need to make some shifts for the betterment of the board, because that is my audience, my immediate audience. I want them to be productive. I want them to be happy, engaged, and really feel that they are shining. And I think for any audience, whether it's a guest on the RVA Small Business Network or an audience that I'm speaking to, I want them to be the focus. I want them to shine. They'll have more fun. And in turn, that will gift me back.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Jo. You did touch on the NSA there, the National Speakers Association, which I recognise as a large movement, I think predominantly in the US, National Speakers Association. Just want to give us a bit of an insight, because I know that you're a president there for a short while. Maybe the notable differences, possibly some of the benefits, and maybe some of the takeaways that you got.
Sure. So the National Speakers Association is a national organization, and I was chapter of one of the 50 states, the Commonwealth of Virginia, about 7 years ago. And Toastmasters really is about leadership. It's about communication skills. NSA, National Speakers Association, is the business of using speaking as a tool to promote whatever you do, whether you're an author, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a trainer, maybe an industry expert. So you get the skill set from Toastmasters, and then you use the NSA then to help you with some of the business application. You launch a business, but then how do you grow it? It's the business skills. And that's really what NSA is all about, the business skills behind launching that speaking business.
Okay, so it's almost like a wrapper around the core skills of Toastmasters to get you to elevate whatever your business idea might be. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Just conscious of time now. We're coming up, actually, we've been talking, Jo, for almost an hour, and I've got loads of pre-prepared questions. very few of which I've actually asked because, of course, we've kept this going quite organically. One thing I did want to just ask you about, we spoke earlier and you spoke about politicians and watching the way they speak and possibly when they don't speak. And I just wanted to touch on the importance of body language and gestures and expressions, because I did a little research for a talk I'm doing in the future about, the history of humankind, where we've been around, I get these numbers slightly wrong, but maybe 30,000 years, but we've only had speech for like 3,000 years or so. And so for a long period of our existence, we didn't really speak at all. So everything was communicated via body language. I just wondered or how you felt about, your body leaks more than the words that you can say. So how do you use body language, and what's a key benefit that you find by using it?
My recommendation when you listen to people, to see if their body language matches their words. And if they don't, then you really won't believe what they say. If I say yes, am I doing that right? Or no, okay, so it's the opposite. Right? A little hard to do, isn't it? But nonetheless,
be congruent with the words you're saying, basically.
Thank you. You want to be congruent. And in training, I always say, if you want to know how your voice comes across naturally, record yourself in a non-confidential conversation with someone. Let them know. 2 minutes, turn off the phone recorder. A week later, bring it out and listen to yourself. How do you come across? Angry, low energy, defensive? What is your overall day to day? And many times people misinterpret your words because of your vocal inflection. There's one thing. Another thing that I highly encourage is eye contact. And we're all multitasking, but the eye contact is such a beautiful gift, and it can read into the soul for the other person. And how can we do that? A lot of times when I coach new speakers and they're nervous about being in front of an audience and looking into someone's eyes because, maybe someone's like this or whatever, I say, look at the forehead, because if I look at your forehead, it looks like I'm looking into your eyes. And then when you're comfortable, slide on down. So vocal variety is key when you're speaking, either in a one-to-one conversation, in a training, in a speech. And it's important to get input in that as well, which is part of the Toastmaster evaluation too.
Absolutely. We've got some off-topic questions coming up here. We've got another one here from Scott, Joan, and I think it's all about if you're a sports fan. So taking you outside your comfort zone a little bit from TV and public sport.
Scott, my gosh, I have a whole Steeler cabinet. They're the professional football team. We have terrible towels that were actually started to raise funds for autism up in Pittsburgh. And so you'll see the banners waved right there. I have Steeler outfits. And I'm part of a Steelers Nation fan club that raises money for Richmond, Virginia Children's Hospital. We do a really nice job with that. So I am an out of control Steelers fan as well, Scott. Are you? That would be my question for you. And so, I love my Pittsburgh football so very much. So we're midway through the season. We're at the top of the division right now. Every game is important. I appreciate you asking that. Also appreciate, I see Sarah for the Professional Speakers Association in the UK. I like that very much. And I will, I'll get that information too. Thank you.
No worries. So is the NSA a global entity, a little bit like Toastmasters as well?
Yes. So there's a global association as well for the professional speakers too. So, and there's so many, great organizations and speakers bureaus. Oh my gosh. You will run out of time before you run out of fantastic speakers. I just love that so much. There's so many opportunities to enrich yourself and learn and enjoy. And that's really what it's all about.
As we come to a conclusion here then, Joan, what do you think about to listen as passionately as you want to speak? Do you think there's any value in that?
I agree. I think listening passionately is the key. And I want to toss out two things, if I could, rather quickly. I think as far as what I would invite everybody to do, as far as, globally changing things in the world, and it's always very fluid, is a hospitable approach, hospitality. And, hospitality, really the definition is friendly, generous care. It's listening, it's engaging. In New Orleans, Louisiana, they call it lagniappe, which I'm not sure I can spell it, but it's giving one little extra thing. I'm reading a book right now. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality, the power of giving just a little bit more than what people expect. So the challenge is, how can we do that in our daily lives? Whether it's in Toastmasters, can you listen better? Can you give just a little bit more in our work, in our world, in our community? And, change is rough. We're all creatures of habit. But my thought for you, and I've embraced this as we turn the corner into the new year, is just improve yourself by 1%. That's it, just 1%. And I love the hospitality approach. We were recently in Greenville, South Carolina, and there was a ballet boy, young man, maybe late high school years, and obviously, was working for tips too, but he knew we were visiting. And so he would give us a little bit of hospitality as far as where to eat, where to drive, what to see. How can you create that memorability of experiences that you can use for your stories to enrich your life? It's such a full circle kind of thing, hospitality. So 1% challenge for everybody. And then the hospitality is something I'd like for everybody to consider for whatever that means to them.
Excellent. I really love that. It almost seems to me like marginal gains when you're just making those small incremental improvements. But I think the way I put a metaphor around what you've just said is like, almost like the baker's dozen. You give 13 instead of 12, and that 13th one is a bit of extra value that they really cherish and appreciate, that makes all the difference and actually sets you apart from everybody else just by doing that one little bit more and extra. Well, I want to say, yes.
I do want to acknowledge our Buffalo Bills fan in Scott.
I'm going to bring it up.
Go Josh Allen. Yeah, indeed. And Canadian Pittsburgh Penguins football. Oh my gosh. I know. I'm not sure when our time is, but it's fun watching all those players as well. Yes.
We'll have to do a separate one, Joan, all about US sports. I think that would probably be back before we get Scott back on again. So thanks for sharing. That's really appreciated.
Yes,
but as we just draw to a close, because I know we're sort of going to finish in just a moment. So I just want to pay thanks and appreciation, not just yourself, Joan. You've been a wonderful speaker and contributor and shared so much wisdom, advice, and wonderful, memorable stories with us this evening. But I also want to recognise Olga Byrne, who's sitting there bravely in the background, putting all this together, stitching it all together and making sure it runs. This is episode 5 of Brand Builders from District 71, Toastmasters Unplugged. And Olga has been she's been the mainstay. She's been the conductor, Joan, of that orchestra you were talking about earlier, getting all those instruments to play at the right time and get that symphony rocking and rolling. So thank you so much, Olga.
You're welcome. It's been a pure joy. Thank you so much for having me, Nigel. And thank you, Olga.
Yeah, and before we go, though, Joan, what I'd like to do is leave all the last words to you and just share some inspiration, some key words or something that people can go away and think about as a memorable nugget or takeaway from this evening's podcast.
As far as Toastmasters goes, I would invite you to venture out to another club and just enjoy a new conversation. We, again, enjoy our club so very much, but there's so much to learn from a new group of people. It's just wonderful, so fascinating. So from Toastmasters, a 2025 challenge would be go to one other meeting right there. And then I would invite all of us to see what we can do for that 1% hospitable care, how we can care for our community, others, work, in listening to get to better communications. which really is the essence of the 100-year-old wonderful organization that Toastmasters is. Those would be my thoughts, Nigel.
Thank you so much, Joan. And we'll leave it there. Really appreciate your time here this evening, this
Appreciate it.
morning, or late afternoon too. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening in the UK.
Bye.
Bye.